Welcome to the next episode of the Default Profitable Podcast. You're listening to a conversation about a guy who's done the work thing, learned a lot of lessons, and is now coming back for a second go round with the wisdom that he's gained. And today, Jim Money's going to share his story with us. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So why don't we start with this? Why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, then we'll talk a little bit about business, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you're moving forward into.
Sure. As you said, I spent the last 30-some years in the working world. But for me personally, the last 25 have been with one organization, which brought me a lot of great opportunities. Started out as a controller, as a traditional bean counter, so to speak, CPA. But I was able to, over the course of that nearly 25 years, move through the organization and eventually become the president for the last 8 years of it, which allowed me to have a lot more say in the direction where we were going and how we would do things. And that's kind of where I kind of really started getting my feet wet with, what it means to have a purpose, what it means to have a set of values that people can not only live with, but can attach to. And it was an incredible run. Personally for me, I've got a wife that I've been married to for 33 years.
Congrats.
We love to travel. We've been traveling a lot since I've stepped away. We traveled quite a bit beforehand, but really this past 8 months has been a whirlwind for me. And then I have a son who graduated from Butler a few years ago, and he lives in the Indianapolis area, which is kind of nice to still have him close to home. At some point, he'll probably decide to go a little bit outside of Indiana, but for the time being, we still have him around us.
Well, that's good. So it's I've got two kids that are still in Indianapolis they've graduated from college. It is nice to have one of them around most times, and it alternates between the two of them, which one's enjoyable to be around. So it's kind of interesting.
Good deal.
So tell us a little bit about some of the things that you learned as you moved up in your organization. I mean, you say you started as a bean counter and ended up as a president. Give us a little bit of information about that evolution.
Well, I had some interesting opportunities through my transition to that organization. One of those opportunities was I was the vice president of finance at that time, which at AFC really meant I was the CFO. And it was the fall of 2008, which is that wonderful Great Recession.
Yes.
I worked in a finance company, so we loaned money to used car dealers so they could fund their inventory needs. And they're small businesses, so they tend to have a pretty high failure rate. You throw the Great Recession in there, and it just took it to another level. And through that process, the organization asked the president to leave. And I remember the CEO of that organization coming to me and telling me that we were going to be parting ways with my boss, Kurt. And the board had decided not to move me up to the next level because they wanted someone outside for comfort for the street. And they did ask me, would I help through the transition? And I obviously needed a job, and I said, sure. That president, CEO, Brian Klingon, he said, I need to stay on top of this. So every day at 5 o'clock, I want us to talk about what happened today. So Monday through Friday. And I'm going like, oh my gosh, I got to spend some time with this guy every single day, blah, blah, blah. It ended up becoming, for those 4 months, just a greatest opportunity for me to prepare myself for the next step to be the president. I got to see how a CEO of a really large organization thinks. I get to learn what it means to be brief, be bright, be gone. That brevity, extremely important. I understand the types of questions now that he was asking me. So he was feeding me all this information, and he did it in an extremely gracious way. I mean, the guy was highly professional, but he was always calm and cool. So I got to see all these things, and probably even to top it off, I learned this other side about Brian. He started and ended our time the same way each time. The first thing he said after he said hello when we started talking was, "How you doing?" How you holding up? And then he would close every conversation with, thanks for doing everything you're doing. I really appreciate everything you're doing. I mean, he did. I mean, it was like clockwork. And so something I dreaded to having to do, I looked forward to 5 o'clock every day because I learned a little bit more each time I got to talk with Brian. And he really kind of set me up to be able to take the helm at some point.
That's interesting because one of the things that's come up repeatedly in 100 and whatever episodes is the importance of people and how you treat them. And as an accountant and as a bookkeeper, I know that, the one thing that bookkeepers and accountants are known for is people skills and concern about individuals.
Yeah.
So how did that lesson, what was the awareness of that like? Because that's a very different skill set than what you were really valued for prior to this experience, probably.
Yeah, I think I was, Matt, I was a closet leader, if I can call it that. I was good at accounting, but at the end of the day, I didn't really care for it as much as I thought I did. I started really liking the strategic stuff a lot more. I started really enjoying the projects and solving problems. And what I always knew about solving problems was I had to have a team of people around me to solve those problems. So, I kind of learned leadership to some degree on the fly, but I enjoyed that time with the people. And then I knew at some point, like, I've got to get out of this controller role because I want to have more interaction with not just the accountants. I want to have interaction with the marketing team. I want to have interaction with the IT group, the HR teams, the training crews, the ops of the business. I mean, that was the stuff that excited me. And so when I could get out on the road and go see not only our customers, but our teams that we had, because we had over 140-ish locations in the United States and Canada. And so it was always a treat to be able to get out there to kind of see how things were going in their world. So I wanted to get out of that accountant's role really fast. And I was able to do that and very fortunate for myself.
So when you made that transition into the big seat, you had been kind of almost groomed for it. Now, do you think that was intentional?
Not so much with Brian, but the guy that they hired when Kurt left the organization was a guy named Don Gottwald.
Okay. And
so Don, one of the first things Don said was, I get it. We have one CFO in this organization at the holding company level. He said, I think that's a travesty. He's like, you're the CFO of AFC. And so that was one of the first things he did is you need to have that title. I want people to understand, who you are. And he thought that was the quickest way to get that out there. But he was the guy that was grooming me. And basically, before he transitioned to another level in the organization, he asked me to step in and be the interim president of one of the companies that we bought. He said, could you do this to help us find the right person? But we want you to sit in that seat for, close to a year, which is what I did. So there was the grooming right there, was to see, because basically 2 years later, he came to me and he said, I've always wondered, how'd you like doing that gig? And I told him I enjoyed it. That was what I always wanted to do, is work more with the people, be close to the business. And he said, great. He said, the guy who's running AFC just turned in his resignation. You want the job? And so it went that quick. And that was June of 2016 when we had that conversation.
So now you've gotten groomed for this. You've performed well in the seat. You enjoyed the seat. But now when you get into the seat, what are some of the things that you wish you had known that would have made it easier for you to succeed? Things that you weren't expecting?
When I think of that question, I didn't have a whole lot of things that kind of caught me off guard.
Mm-hmm.
But before, I'd like to go a little bit earlier than that.
No problem.
Which would be like when I was in that controller role, and even before that. I mean, one of the things I always did is I was like, I wanted to make sure I didn't make mistakes. I did everything I could to make sure I did make a gosh darn mistake, or if we were going to do something that didn't fail. And I kicked myself because, the only way you're going to learn anything is sometimes stubbing your toe or saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And then the only time it's bad if you make a mistake is if you don't try to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
And so I took that throughout my entire career. And my goal always was, for every failure, for every challenge, there is a silver lining, but you got to spend time to figure out what it is. And I think there's usually an opportunity. So I was very fortunate. I think I got a lot of the kinks ironed out of me before I stepped into that role.
Yeah.
But one of the things that sticks out to me were, gosh, I wish I could have done something a little bit differently. And it's not necessarily the business. It was more of a leadership issue. And I can tell you, it was in mid-October 2016, for all intents and purposes, my CIO, a guy named John Rogers, had just got back from the Salesforce conference called Dreamforce.
Yep.
And he was on cloud nine, and this was a Thursday night before fall break began. And back in those days in Carmel, fall break was Friday and Monday.
Yeah.
So it's Thursday, it's about 4:30, and John's trying to, he's talking to me all about all this stuff that's going on and how great it was. U2 was the closing show, blah, blah, blah. And I told John, I was like, John, listen, man, I fly out to New York City with my family tomorrow morning. I need to get some packing done. Could we just carry this conversation a little bit later? So he was excited. He was really excited. And he said, sure. And he kind of walked away, maybe with his head down a little bit. It was Saturday, and I was in New York City, Manhattan, at the Italy with my wife. We're having a glass of wine. My son's off at the Nutella bar or something. It's about 1 o'clock, and my phone started ringing. And it was a guy named Maury Wolford. And Maury worked for Odessa, our sister organization. And it's rather strange. I get a call from Maury, and he said, hey, Jim. I said, yeah. And he's like, I have some bad news. I said, what? He said, John Rogers passed away on Saturday. I was like, oh my gosh, And that little moment, there's a lot of emotions that were going on in my mind. But days after it all happened, I kept thinking about that Thursday when I didn't give him the time. And so I have made it a point that if someone comes to see me about something, and I can tell that it's something that's bothering them or something they're really excited, I did everything in my power to make sure I gave them that opportunity to have my ear. They came to me to see me, and I need to make sure of that. And I think sometimes as a leader, you have to remember that you got to be there for your people at times. And sometimes that means you got to maybe push your stuff off to the side a little bit. That's an extreme situation there that happened to me.
Well, but I forget who it was, but I had somebody that they talked, their lesson from taking over was that they went from being the person that was at home with their wife complaining about the boss to be the person that everybody else was at home with their wife complaining about the boss. And it was, and their impact wasn't just with their wife, their impact was on everybody's kitchen table. And you really need to think about, in your case, this guy was excited, he wanted to talk to you. You had other stuff that you weren't thinking about the other guy. Your mentor, on the other hand,
yeah, exactly,
starts and ends every conversation with, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And that's in a large organization, that level of individual care is
100%. Yeah. So that stuck with me, and it's the combination of those two things have really meant. So I basically, you can slip, and that's what happens, and so you got to catch yourself, and that was my slip right there, and it caught me off guard.
Yeah, well, that's a tough lesson to learn, tough lesson.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a little bit different. A lot of times I'll ask people, what do you say when somebody says they want to start their own business? But when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to take the big seat, I'm going to be the president, I'm going to be the leader, how do you kind of test their commitment and whether or not they're ready? What are the things that you look for to make sure it's a good decision? If they come to you for advice and they say, hey, listen, you've done this, I'm thinking that this is what I want to do. what do I need to be prepared for? Where do you start with the questioning?
I really look for people that bring solutions to the table. I've seen people that had, C-suite titles that kind of worked for me that would ask me, well, what do you think? And when someone starts talking like, what do you think, Jim? That's usually a bad sign. There's a confidence. I've told a number of people that if you ever want to come to me and talk to me about a problem, you can do that any old day. But if you come to me and you ask me to provide you the solution, that's a problem. That doesn't work. And some people didn't get that, didn't understand it, and that told me that person would probably never be ready for that seat. I mean, they've got to have the confidence to at least put forth some options that we could go down. Now they may say, listen, we could go down A or B. Right. We talk about what do we think would be the better solution. I'm like, well, okay, let's talk. But that to me was always one of the key things was, have they already, put forth the effort to understand what it is they need to do going forward?
Well, and I think that's the what Daniel Pink's intrinsic motivation kind of idea. It's like if you're going to be the leader, you got to start on the inside.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for external validation, you're looking for external solutions, you're looking for external, that's kind of rough. So you mentioned that you have next chapter coming up. As you think back the 24 years of skills that you built, 25 years of skills that you built as a leader and doing all that, how do you apply that going forward? What do you do going forward? Because you're not that old yet.
No, not too old. Old enough.
You're not done yet.
No. Yeah, I mean, so when I decided to hang up the proverbial cleats, there were three things that were tugging at me, that I wanted to spend my time and energy. Mm-hmm. One of them was an obvious one for a lot of people, and that was more community involvement. So giving back. So that one's pretty simple. The other two, one is connections, and the other is counseling. And so that connections for me is that creating that network of retaining those existing connections that I've had, people that I really enjoy to have those conversations with, maybe allow them to use me as a sounding board to some degree, but I don't want to dictate things. I want to be there to listen and ask questions. But I really look forward to the counseling side. So there might be things that I'm going to be doing on the nonprofit side, helping a nonprofit from a board perspective. I can see that happening. There's some things I'm working on right now. But the other is maybe there's some things in the future where I can have that same relationship with some smaller, middle-sized businesses, either from an advisory perspective or a board perspective. I have been around the block a few times. I think the living and breathing and excelling and succeeding through 2008 and 2009 was a big one. And then you get to throw the icing on the cake as having to live through COVID and the implications of that and the transit. I mean, it's like I went through multiple MBA sessions in my career. Yes. And so those things I think are invaluable, and there'll be some things where I'll be able to do, but I want to be able to do it in a way that I don't have to clock in and work 9 to 5. I want to have that flexibility so I can do some other things, especially things like community and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think and it's been a pretty steady drumbeat of people starting businesses don't know what they don't know because they haven't been there. And having a resource like you or having a resource like SCORE where it's people that have done the work and they can kind of say, hey, listen, I know it looks good on paper. Let me tell you how it really works. Or you didn't even put this on paper, but let me tell you why it's important you had it, is really super valuable. And in my experience, the people that have accomplished the most also are the most willing to share.
Sure. Yes.
So, you've certainly put up the results. So the fact that you're willing to give back is a great testament to that. So, all right. So as we wrap up, already hit 20 minutes, which is pretty quick. But as we wrap up, is there any, if somebody is about to assume a leadership position, or if somebody's on a leadership track, is there any wisdom or advice you would lead with and kind of give them a, hey, make sure you're aware of this?
I would always tell people that, you're a leader, but that doesn't mean you go alone. Okay. So I get it that sometimes people, they get to a point where they want to get to that level, and it's like I get to make some of these really meaty decisions, but what you do, but usually I think what people think of is I make the decision versus, I hear everyone else, and from that we can make the decision. I'm a big firm believer in what Mr. Ken Blanchard once said, and that is that none of us are as smart as all of us. And I think a leader who decides to go down the path of doing it all themselves will probably fail. And until they realize that the best job they could do, and I was very fortunate because I did it, was I surrounded myself with people that could kick me out of my job. I wanted people that could take my job. And that's what I was able to do when I left. Was I had a couple people, and one person stood out. And that person is sitting in that seat today, and that guy's name is Will Mitchell, and groomed him. And I love it when a plan comes together like that.
And that is great advice. I mean, we deal with people all the time, and we say you're paying your people an awful lot of money every week for them not to use their talents. You might need to take your hands off everything. So that's great. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I want to remind everybody that you'll be able to find information about Jim and contact information in the show notes, All Profitable. And if you're listening, there's 3 ways you can help us grow. You can hit subscribe wherever you're listening. You can leave a review, and you can share an episode. Jim, thanks for coming on as a guest.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Default Profitable. Until then, stay focused, keep working, stay profitable.